Thank you. Can you hear me okay at the back? Right. I like to think actually, as my wife is in the audience, that it was Wolverhampton Wanderers, but there you go. I want to talk about this new publication which came out in September, Architects and Civil Engineers of Scarborough, 1800 to 1914. It started off in 2001 as Architects and Civil Engineers of 19th Century Scarborough by Anne and Paul Bayliss, a biographical dictionary, a series of potted biographies of the architects and engineers who are working in Scarborough. A very, very useful publication. The Baylisses were mining the census records, directories, newspapers, the background information at the Institution of Civil Engineers and the Royal Institute of British Architects and so on. And certainly in my profession as in building conservation, I found it very useful, and helping Jane Grenville update the Pevners Buildings of England for the North Riding. We wore 2 copies out amongst ourselves. But it became increasingly apparent to me that there was a lot more information out there, largely due to the digitisation of material, and access to it was getting easier and easier. And also there was 1 or 2 little areas where the Baylisses had got 1 or 2 things wrong. For instance, they'd extrapolated the dates of birth of architects and engineers from the census, and that can be up to a year out actually, either way. So I decided I would update this book. One of my prime aims was, or prime motives was, that Scarborough has such a fantastic record in the 19th century, not only of architects coming in, big name people like Cuthbert Broderick, the Grand Hotel, and the cover is Broderick's drawing or painting of the Grand Hotel, part of his presentation work for the development of the building. George Bodley up at St Martin's, Joseph Paxton at the Spa and the gardens there, and before that Henry Wyatt working at the Spa. Big national names coming to Scarborough because at that time the town is really punching above its weight. But also architects who trained here, some of whom stayed, some of whom moved away and made really quite big names for themselves, and are now perhaps rather more forgotten than they ought to be. So later on in the talk I'm going to be concentrating on a few of those architects. The original book was one of a series that the Baylisses were doing. So they did work on the medical profession, photographers, and Jonathan Willis is taking on that work that they did on the photographers and developing his website and its researches around the photographers who are working in Scarborough and so on. And all of these are really, really useful source books, but as with architects and civil engineers, beginning to come out of date. I spoke about the access to material, and a lot of it is now actually quite readily available through sites such as Ancestry and Find My Past. For example, this is Josiah Fairbank's application for membership of the Institution of Civil Engineers. You can go on to Ancestry now and find that. When the Baylisses started working on their book, you had to leaf your way through these massive volumes which weren't indexed. They weren't in any alphabetical order, they were in chronological order. It would be a nightmare. And these things give vast amounts of information about the early lives of engineers and architects. You won't be able to read that there, but it basically tells you Fairbank's background before he applied for his membership of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And when he came to Scarborough, he became the engineer to the Scarborough Gas Works, the Scarborough Gas Company. Scarborough, very early opening of a gasworks, 1834. It's not until the 1850s that Fairbanks comes. And he also designs, when he's here, the public seawater baths at the bottom of Lance Cliff there, now known as Coney Island Amusement Arcade. He designed the gardens on the north cliff, the big assembly rooms down the cliff slope there, which only lasted a few years. He designed the replacement for St Thomas's Hospital, the almshouses now on Hoxton Road, and he also had a scheme for building a tunnel from the South Bay to the North Bay, partly, he said, so that lifeboat could be got through quicker, rather than actually sailing right round. It never happened, of course, but he was a really radical thinker in terms of the development of Scarborough. And similarly with architects, this is the application of Sidney Tugwell for membership of the Institute of British Architects, or the Royal Institute of British Architects rather. Sidney Tugwell was the brother of Frank Tugwell, who's obviously much better known in Scarborough than Sidney. And what was interesting finding this is that actually this is one of the cases where Anne and Paul Bayliss had got some of the information wrong about who Sidney Tugwell trained with. It's Nesfield. He trained with. They thought he trained with Norman Shaw, but that's not the case. And Sidney Tugwell went away and made a big career in Bournemouth. I mean, he's almost as well known in Bournemouth as Frank is up in Scarborough here. And came back to Scarborough and retired and died in rather mysterious circumstances, but that's another story. I might tell you later if I've got time, or if you ask me. I want to concentrate initially on one particular architect whose story we've really developed since the first edition of the book came out. William Baldwin Stewart. If you read the first edition, it says something like William Baldwin Stewart left Scarborough in 1871 and nothing more is heard of him. Disappears off the face of the earth, apparently. Anne and Paul Bayliss found actually that he'd gone back to the United States, where he'd been working in the 1850s, and subsequently I've been able to sort of trace some of his progress over the United States as well. Similarly with his brother Victor, he went to Canada, and I've been able to trace his progress through Canada. A lot more success with him actually, but I'm not going to talk about him tonight because that's almost a full lecture in its own right. And frankly, the Canadians have been much more cooperative in providing information than the Americans have. I don't know why that is, but there you go. I've got a huge list of the work that Vincent Stewart did in Canada, and I can't find any buildings other than one that William Baldwin Stewart did. So this is what he's well known for initially. The sea bathing, Royal Northern Sea Bathing Hospital on Foreshore Road. So he's British, he's born in London in 1831. Sometime in the 1850s, he goes to the United States and he works in New York as an architect. Can only find one building that he produced during that period. We're not sure whether it was while he was there or when he'd come back, he won the competition to build the Northern Sea Bathing Infirmary, which was its correct name at the time. One of the first patrons, the Archbishop of York, died about 6 months after the building was opened. They appointed Queen Victoria as a replacement trustee and adopted the name Royal Northern Sea Bathing Infirmary without correct authorisation, actually. They should have obtained what's called a letter patent, but they never did. So he designed this and decided to set up in practice in Scarborough. And these are his main works in Scarborough running from 1860 to 1871, which was the refreshment rooms at the Grand Hotel. And finally, after that, developed in partnership with Vincent Stewart, the Pavilion Hotel and what became the Lonsborough Rooms and Pavilion Square and so on. And he was a very, very eclectic architect and has left Scarborough with quite a number of interesting buildings in all sorts of styles. So if we go back to the sea bathing infirmary, this is built in what's called the Italianate style, shallow pitch roof with the gables facing outwards with the barge boards, oversailing barge boards at the end there. And you can see a lot of buildings in Scarborough, quite a lot of villas and so on, in that sort of general style. It was quite popular at the time. But when he came to build the Westborough Methodist Church in 1862, he goes for classical. He's perfectly happy dealing with classical, except, of course, he adds these rather weird towers on the top, which you don't actually see in classical. They're rather sort of Baroque rather than classical. They've gone now, and in my opinion, the building is better for not having them. It looks more balanced. It looks there like as if it's, I don't know, shooting up to nowhere. And then for the Dean Road Jail, 1866, he goes for the Gothic. This is a really very, very interesting exercise in a faux Gothic architecture, emulating a castle. It's got the matriculations there, where we're all taught as school kids, weren't we, that they used to pour boiling oil out of them and onto the people down below. Actually, it was probably worse stuff than that, but let's not go into that. It's got a castle gates there. It's got little slits here with mock chains coming out of to lift a drawbridge which doesn't exist, arrow slits and so on. And of course, at the top there's the borough seal. If you go around the back, it's very plain. It's what architectural historians often call Queen Anne front, Mary Anne back. As is this building, the towers. This is almost exactly, it's almost reusing the drawings from the Dean Road Jail in this house, which was built for William Jarvis, a brewer. And again, if you go up onto the behind the castle dykes and look at the back of it, it's blank brickwork. It's all front. But that's his idea of trying to match in with the castle. So very, very happy in several styles. In Bridlington, 1863, he did the Alexandra Hotel, which is in a sort of French style or French Baroque style. Fantastic building. That was knocked down round about the same time as his Pavilion Hotel was knocked down in Scarborough. 1971 this was knocked down, I think. And actually, that's far greater a loss to seaside architecture than the loss of the pavilion. I mean, that was shameful anyway, but this was a much finer piece of William Baldwin Stewart's work. And I think, you know, if it was still there now in Bridlington, that would be a fantastic building to go and see. And down in Filey, 1861, the Spa, which is now Ackworth House, or it keeps changing its name slightly, Ackworth House. Again, in the French style. This is still there, but has been altered quite a lot, but with these very distinctive concave tops to the roofs here, and the balconies. So that's a style which he was very, very comfortable with, and I suspect there's some of his American influence coming through there. Certainly, you see in the work of Vincent Stewart in Canada, in Winnipeg, that sort of style has influenced his work there. And finally, he did quite a lot of houses. This is not one of his best works, frankly. It's the club on Westover Road. But what's interesting about it, it was built for Sir Alex Campbell, KCB, and the only Sir Alex Campbell I can find was the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. What he's doing, having a holiday house in Scarborough, because that's what it was built as, I don't know, and I need to do a little bit more searching into that. So as I say, in 1871, he leaves Scarborough and initially disappears from the face of the earth. But as more and more information has been coming out, we managed to track him and track his progress. So here he is, arriving in New York, 1872. It's the crew list of the crew and arriving passenger list of the SS Parthia, a Cunarder. I think it was her second voyage. And there he is with William Baldwin Stewart Jr., surveyor, Victor Stewart, a surveyor, and William Baldwin Stewart Sr., also surveyor. Interesting that they don't put down that they're architects. Perhaps at that time there was much more demand for surveyors in the United States and Canada. So we know when they go and when they arrive in the States, and there's the ship they went on. That's just appeared quite recently. That's the SS Parthia on her maiden voyage the year before. So, you know, that's a pretty good impression of the kind of voyage that William Baldwin Stewart might have been making. And then he makes a declaration of his intention to apply for citizenship of the United States. So he makes this intention in the Superior Court of San Diego County. I can't quite read the date there, 1885 I think it is. And it takes him a while, and you can see here on the Great Register of San Diego County in 1884 that by then he's a citizen in San Diego and is listed as an architect. Can't find any buildings in San Diego that he designed yet, and I'm not about to go and look. And then he moves over to Los Angeles. This is the voters register of 1892 to 94, and interestingly, in this country, voters register is almost just a list of names and addresses. But in the United States, they're gathering so much more information about their citizens much earlier than we are here. There's the kind of information that you might expect to find in a census. And this is just a list of electors. So I have to put my glasses on to read it. So it tells us Stewart, William Baldwin, there he is. He's 5'8". He's got light complexion. His eyes are brown. His hair's grey. That's the nearest we'll get to a photograph of him. Because a lot of these architects are, for some reason, camera shy. I can't find a photograph of him. And it goes on to tell you further on whether he can write, and I hope he can because he's an architect, whether he can read, and whether he speaks English. And then later on in the censuses, they're gathering information about ethnicity, which in William Baldwin Stewart's case, it tells us that is white Caucasian. And while he's in San Francisco, I think, Los Angeles rather, I think he begins to work as a property developer as well as an architect. And he's buying land and developing it. This map is a map of a piece of land called the Huber Tract. A tract is a big block of land that's set out when they're setting out towns in the United States, and they then sell blocks of them. So it's divided up into blocks, which is why the American street naming system or the postal system refers to blocks, because this is what they're doing. They're selling blocks of land. And if you can make out, I think it's this street here is called Olive Street, and the up and down street, this one here, is now called South Grand Street. It's named as 8th Street on there. Let's just go in a bit closer just to see it. This is Olive Street here, and this is what's called South Grand Street. And I think it's this block here that is buying. And if we go there now, oh, that's his address in there. If you go there now, courtesy of Google Street View, he's purchasing this block here, and he must be developing houses there because he's listed there in the census and in the electoral roll. It's obviously changed massively since then. The only thing he would recognise is these rather nice lamp columns here. They're rather nice. They're rather like the ones outside the spa here in Scarborough, and it would have been presumably gas lamps. So we again have not found any buildings that he actually designed. I can't find a picture of that street in 1890 or 1900. And I can find details of it being redeveloped because there's actually a planning report on that, but we can't find any photographs. So at that point, William Baldwin Stewart does finally disappear off the face of the earth, except for one peculiarity. This is the 1900 American census. He's listed there, and he's married to a lady called Rebecca. And here's the marriage and death records. June 1988, he marries Rebecca Stewart. That's his brother's wife. Not quite sure what's going on here. Victor Stewart is working in Canada, and something goes wrong with the building site. Some people are killed, and he takes some of the blame. And he moves to the United States. And it says a quotation in the press, for the health of Mrs. Stewart. So whether she's suffering because he's getting stressed out about this health and safety business, I don't know. He then comes back to Manitoba and works as an architect. And there's no sign of Rebecca. And then he disappears. About 1882, 83, he just disappears off the scene. So whether he dies and Rebecca's stayed in the United States and marries his brother or not, I don't know. Or whether something funny is going on, I don't know. And you know, this is something I'm going to have to dig into a bit more deeply, I think, because I'm intrigued by this as to what's going on here. And yes, another peculiarity is on the early American census, when Vincent and Rebecca are in the United States, she is listed as architect next to her name, and he is listed as homemaker. I don't know. I'll leave that with you. So I now want to go on then and sort of delve into the lives of some architects who were born, brought up in Scarborough, trained in Scarborough, and then went on to make national reputations. So in an alphabetical order, Edwin Cooper, Thomas Davison, Henry Hare, Albert Myers, Fred Rowntree and Frank Tugwell. I'm not going to talk about Frank Tugwell because lots has been spoken about Frank Tugwell. He's only one of that group who came back to Scarborough and developed a really strong practice here in Scarborough. And I thought Diana Tosca might be in the audience this evening. She knows 500% more about Frank Tugwell than I do, so I'm not going to go there. I'm going to look at these, but not quite in that order. I'm going to look at them in the order of how much of their work is still visible to be seen in Scarborough. So Fred Rowntree, 1860 to 1927, his article to Charles Augustus Bury, who's a very prominent architect in Scarborough. His best known work now is probably the Unitarian Church on where Westborough becomes Fallsgrave Road, the Unitarian Church and the school next to that. He trained several architects. He has a bit of a complicated history as well because he goes bankrupt, moves down to London, and in the 1911 census, age 56, he's married to a 23-year-old girl, except he lies about his age on the census. He's actually 66. So what's going on there, I don't know. So all this kind of stuff coming out that people didn't expect. Fred Rowntree's background is impeccable, as you would expect with a good Quaker. So his article to Charles Augustus Bury. He then works with Edward Burgess, who's a Leicester and London architect, Fred comes back up to Scarborough to work as clerk of works on the building of the Rowntree's shop at the top of Westborough there, where the Brunswick Pavilion now is. He then enters a partnership with a chap called Charles Eadson in Scarborough, does quite a lot of good work, 1884 to 1890. 1890 he moves up to Glasgow, of all places. There's a connection there. I think it's with the Carr's biscuit people, who are also Quakers. And he moves up to Glasgow in partnership with Malcolm Stark, but still does a lot of work in Scarborough because of the Rowntree connection. And then moves to London and sets up an independent practice. Later his sons join him, and he has a branch office in York. And all through that period, he's continued to do work in Scarborough. And this is where he was born, 47 Newborough. He's from the grocery branch of the Rowntrees, not the Drapers or the chocolate branch, the grocery branch. This is John Rowntree's grocery shop. It later moves uptown, and they live above the shop in this building here. It's a very, very spacious building up there. It's not like you'd normally think of living above the shop. In later years, that traded as a hotel up there. It's quite spacious accommodation. But it's nice that that's still there. And this is a list of, again, his major works in Scarborough. The Sandside Coffee House, which I'll come to in a minute. The ones in yellow are the ones he does with Charles Eadson, so we can't actually tell exactly who the designer was, but probably the ones which he's doing for other members of the Rowntree family are Fred's work. So that will include the warehouse on Wooler Street, the villa at Granville Road, and the Weaponess Estate Plan, which was a very early scheme to develop the area around where the Mere later developed. There was a proposal to form housing plots there, and so on, which again is another lecture in its own right. And then work which he does while he's in partnership with Malcolm Stark and in London in various locations throughout the town. So this is the what's called the coffee house. It's not a coffee shop as you would know it now. It's part of the. It comes out of the adult school movement that the Quakers are running in Scarborough and elsewhere, and it's part of the Quaker temperance ethos. It's designed to provide facilities for people who are that doesn't involve drink. So coffee, upstairs there's billiard rooms, lecture halls, and that kind of thing. So this is the bottom of Eastborough, and I think this is an important building because it's the first building that Fred Rowntree designs after qualifying as an architect. It's his first personal job, as it were, and it's an important piece of the social history of Scarborough. In that the Quakers are very, very active in the town, very influential, and they're building the adult schools and these coffee houses. They start with the coffee cart company, taking coffee out onto the beach. So it is an important building, and potentially quite an attractive building. If the windows weren't painted an awful colour, just white would help. But it's beginning to show the various themes of Fred's work. These tall pointed gables coming up through the roof. And you see it here. This is the Rowntree's repository and warehouse on Wooler Street. It's a fantastic building for a warehouse. This is where the warehousing's done for the shop. This is the William Rowntree branch, and you could also store your furniture there if you're going elsewhere. And again, the tall, thin gables rising up through, that's a very, very much a Fred Rowntree trademark. And this building's actually very successfully converted to flats. I think it's a really handsome building for a warehouse. And then the Quaker Meeting House on York Place. This is the only photograph of it I can find. This was demolished as part of the Brunswick Pavilion development, but again you begin to see the Fred Rowntree. It's one of these buildings that if you look at it, you don't know the architect. That looks like a Fred Rowntree. I was just thinking the other night, there's a huge audience here tonight. When I first joined the society in 1976, we met in the magazine room at the library, and there must have been about 30 people in the audience for lectures. But every year we had what was called the invitation lecture, where we'd attract big audiences from the other historical societies around, and we always had that meeting in the Quaker Meeting House on York Place, in the big room there. That was almost as uncomfortable as the library. And then the first of two adult schools. So these were the schools that the local Quakers were setting up to provide education for adults who hadn't had any education. So providing education later in life. This building's been messed about a bit. This has been added on. It's now flats, I think. So this is the Fred Rowntree bit. There was a plaque here, but it's been plastered over. The doors like this are very much a feature of his work, as we'll see at the Temperance Hall in Scalby. L-shaped building again, gables rising up, and a rather nice plaque up here telling you all about it. And that's been converted to, there's some business units and a hall up there, which is very, very nice. He did quite a lot of work in Scalby. What is now the Miners' Convalescent Home, Low Hall, is a Fred Rowntree job. And members of the Rowntree family were buying up plots of land all around Scalby Nabs and building houses which were designed by Fred. And the coffee shop at Westborough. Is it Westborough there? Yeah, I think so. Now H. Samuel, and a lot of that's been lost. The interior is by a chap called George Walton from Glasgow, who did a lot of work with Miss Cranston in her tea rooms at Glasgow before she famously linked up with Charles Rennie Mackintosh to do the Willow tea rooms. And Riseborough, one of Fred's early houses, very much influenced by the arts and crafts movement, and Roscoe rooms. Again, it's worth looking at this because in a minute we're going to go to somewhere exotic, and you see some of that influence still coming through. And Oralton School, which is one of two big schools on Filey Road. The other one was designed by Edwin Cooper, which we'll come to in a minute. So in this case, I think not very successfully, Fred Roundtree's tried to develop a college-type looking school, but using domestic motifs, and I don't think it quite works there. That's another view of it. So, why do we have a Google map of the West China Medical Centre? Well, the West China Medical Centre actually starts off as a university, and Fred Roundtree won the competition for designing the West China Union University, presumably a paper exercise. It would have been sent plans of the site, and he entered the competition. I don't know how many other competitors there were, maybe about 6 or 7. He won the job, and he then actually went out to China. And the image at the beginning was from Richenda George, who's Fred's great-great-granddaughter, and she's published this book, Architectural Odyssey. It's all about Fred's journey to China and his journey across land, up the Yangtze River in junks and various other kinds of things, and then across country, carried in what are those things called? Sedan chair. Sorry, they've suddenly gone. Like a sedan chair is carried across, and he spends quite a few months in China designing the detail of this university. So there's the concept plan, or concept drawing. This building at the front here is this one here, which made it into the builder as a feature. I had hoped to get some more images, but for some reason it's quite hard to get anything from Google Street View in China. Actually, it's impossible. It just goes blank. But Andrew George, Richenda's son, has actually been out there, and that building is no longer there. It's been replaced by this, and they've built some buildings either side of it. But this one is still here, the Education and Administration block. And to me, this looks like a Fred Roundtree building with Chinese details added on. Although it did go into the detail quite in quite some depth. And this is a detailed drawing of how to build one of these Chinese eaves and ridges, which comes up and turns up. I don't know what the architectural term for that is. I'm sure there is one. And I'm not quite sure how deeply he got into this, whether he's just sticking Chinese bits on to buildings, or whether he's going into it it's actually constructed in a Chinese way. I don't know. I mean, to me, this looks like the Roscoe rooms with Chinese detail, which is great. I think it's great fun. And this building is apparently still there, as is this one. I mean, this could be a Western European building rather than a Chinese one. Particularly, I don't think these sort of mini gables up here are really a Chinese feature. I think this is one of Fred Roundtree's tall, thin gables, and he thought, oh, better make it look a bit Chinese and put this on. And this interior is certainly looks to me like UK kind of construction with Chinese detailing. So let's move on to a very different character, Edwin Cooper. read round his photograph. He looks a bit sort of laid back, doesn't he? A bit sort of almost louche or louche, however you pronounce it. But Edwin Cooper's a rather sort of sturdy sort of a person. And he was articled to John Hall and Frank Tugwell. John Hall, no relation to me, trained quite a few architects in Scarborough. He designed this building here, and I've never been able to find the plans of it. But I think there's actually wrought iron arches underneath here. I'd love to find out the details of this building, because this is not a particularly typical building, the way it's constructed in Scarborough. He then works in York with Walter Penty, and then Walter Brierley, who was a very famous York architect, then Goldie Child and Goldie in London. So like a lot of provincial young architects, they do their initial training and then move away to either London or one of the other big cities and work with one of the big practices. And some of them never come back. And Edwin Cooper doesn't really come back. He does a lot of work in Scarborough with John Hall, but he really makes his career in London, as do a few others. And John Hall has a habit of his pupils coming back as partners. So he forms a partnership with Hall, Cooper and Davis. And earlier than that, John Hall had made a partnership with Frank Tugwell, who he trained Frank Tugwell. And then a partnership with Cooper and Davis in London and Scarborough, but it's just a little office here in Scarborough. It's not doing very much. And then it's practicing solely in London. And he was a very modest background. His father was a carriage driver, died when Cooper was quite young, and brought up in Nelson Street. Notoriously, the plaque is on the wrong building. It doesn't matter because they're all alike. The street was renamed. And those were his principal buildings in Scarborough. The first ones are in partnership with John Hall, and the last three are ones he did by himself. And this is Scarborough College, theoretically designed by Hall, Cooper and Davis, but we know it was actually Edwin Cooper, and very, very young, in 1890, he's in his 20s. And a very, very mature work for an architect of that age, and really, really interesting building. The gas company houses on Seymour Road, in a sort of arts and craftsy sort of style. And I think his best building in Scarborough, the higher grade school, the boys' high school in Westwood, that's the kind of school you would expect to find being built in London by major London architects like Norman Shaw and so on. The use of brick and stone, and the way the building is massed. And a trademark of Cooper is these cupolas. He puts on the top. There was one on Scarborough College, but I think it's gone. And he also commissions a sculptor to do the sculpted patterns, Henry Fair, which I did talk about that during COVID year when all our talks were online, and I think that might be still out there. I don't know. And the tennis pavilion on Filey Road, the dormer windows are later. They look like a row of dentures, don't they, sticking up there. I think the original ones were actually sort of round. And he did some work for the spa, including the bandstand here. The wings are a bit later, but they're to his design. He was what's the word I want? he was a sort of house architect for the spa for a while, but I think he got fed up with them because they were notorious for changing their minds. A committee deciding one thing and then another, and they upset quite a few architects like that. And there's correspondence where Cooper's not playing ball. They're writing letters to him. Can we have the plans, please? Can we have the plans, please? And he finally writes back saying, no, I quit. I'm not having you changing things anymore. But his most famous building is the Port of London Authority offices in Scarborough, in London, which were the ones. I think it would be fantastic in Scarborough, wouldn't it? It would fill half the town. And this is the work he submits to the Royal Academy, and he becomes a royal accommodation. And he's still fairly well known in Scarborough, but deserves to be better known. But this is a guy who's completely unknown now, Albert Myers. His article to Scarborough architect John Caleb Petch, who does a lot of good work, including the hydropathic establishment on Spring Hill Road, somewhere up there, off Fallsgrave. He works with C.T. Marshall in Newcastle, and then he does the thing, goes off to London. He joins H.M. Office of Works, what becomes later the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works, and spends a career designing post offices. He's elected to the as a Royal IRBA in 1906, and he gets an OBE for his work. Like a lot of architects who train in Scarborough and other provincial towns, his background is that his parents, or his father, is a builder. So there's quite a few, that's quite common. In the 19th century, builders send one of their sons off to be trained as an architect. They might not practice as an architect, but they're sent off to train as an architect. So Abe Moore, A.W. Moore and Sons, famous Scarborough buildings firm, George Moore, goes off and trains as an architect. William Peacock, who had the brickworks on Beaconsfield Street and built part of the seawall and so on, a big building practice in Scarborough. He sends his son off, Gordon, to train with Charles Bury, actually. And that's quite common. And Albert Myers is one of these. He starts off by designing houses for his father. So if you're in Lyle Street or Ramsey Street, if you happen to live in one of those houses, it's pretty certainly built by Albert Myers' father, and it might be designed by Albert Myers himself. But he goes off, he joins the Office of Works, and they have a sort of unit which specialises in building post offices. And this is a time when the post office is building really classy buildings. From about the 1870s, they're building really quite handsome buildings which are statements in the street scene. So in Huntress Row, the first purpose-built post office in Scarborough, as opposed to somebody's shop somewhere, or house even, is next to the what was the Conservative Club, now the Premier Inn. It was a bank at one stage. I think it was National Westminster, I can't remember. It's now a shop. A very handsome building in the Palazzo style. And then the next post office in Scarborough on Aberdeen Walk, a fantastic building, huge building, a very, very handsome Baroque style. So the post office building, quality buildings. Myers doesn't do any in Scarborough itself. The nearest one is in Bridlington. Don't have a picture of that because it was badly damaged during the Second World War, sorry. So this is one of Myers' jobs down in Rochester, which I hope to visit soon. A very, very sort of sedate but handsome, I suppose it's almost Queen Anne style with the post office here, which is, it's designed to give you a sense of security. You know, this is a safe establishment. But in villages, this is Ingatstone in Essex, is designing something that's villagey, but nevertheless, it makes you feel safe. That's a safe place to go into. And in Clacton-on-Sea is adopting this sort of neo-Georgian, horrible modern windows, but again a very, very sort of handsome building. And then suddenly he gets to do something really big. This is Mount Pleasant sorting office down in London. Huge building, a really, really big sorting. I have a love-hate relationship with this building. I mean, I love it. It's a very sort of stripped-back classical design, very sort of modern. But about 30 years ago, when the Heritage Lottery Fund was being set up, I was on one of their focus groups, and they used to put me up in a hotel not far from there. And if you had a bad bedroom, you were kept awake all night by vans coming and going from Mount Pleasant sorting office. But I think it's a great building. And then the next thing he does is the Faraday building. This is a huge telephone exchange. It's the first international telephone exchange in the country. It's when telephony is really taking off. A massive, massive building. I mean, that's the equivalent of the data centres they're building now. It's a big building, except of course this is decent architecture. If you like, sort of that kind of period of modern architecture, built in Portland stone with a copper roof. This is like a money no object job, as opposed to data centres, which are just basically sheds. And it's also gained a little bit of notoriety in that the height of it blocked views of St. Paul's Cathedral. So as a result of this building, Myers' claim to fame is that a building bylaw was brought in. Actually, it was an Act of Parliament which restricted the height of buildings, which would potentially block the view of St. Paul's. That's all disappeared now because there's all these huge buildings nearby. But Myers' building caused this Act of Parliament to restrict the height in those days. He designed the War Memorial at East Sheen, and then one of his final post offices is this one in Penarth, in this very sort of linear, modern style. So a very, very eclectic mix of styles that Myers was working with. And I think it's rather sad that nobody, other than me, and now you lot, have heard of him and know about his work, his few pieces of work in Scarborough. And I think his house deserves a blue plaque as well. So, yes. Time's pressing on. I'll have a quick look finally at Henry Hare, again another pupil of Charles Augustus Bury. He disappears down to London and works as Zephaniah King. He then travels around studying architecture. He's elected RIB in 1987, then a fellow, and then he actually becomes the president of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Again, hardly known in Scarborough now. And yet the town produces the president of the foremost architectural institution in the country. Again, he deserves a blue plaque. He's got a bit of a twinkle in his eye, not like Edwin Cooper, I think. There's very, very few buildings of him in Scarborough. I think he designed a shop on Fallsgrave and he did a bit of work for his father. But nationally, he's doing all sorts of really big buildings, which is winning by competition. So the Town Hall in Oxford, fantastic building. the Passmore Edwards Library in Hackney. He does a lot of these Carnegie libraries. You can see there possibly where Edwin Cooper's getting some of his ideas from in this brickwork with this stripy stone. Hare has a keenness on doing buildings that very successfully turn corners. That's something he specialises in. He specialises in libraries, and he also then later becomes an assessor for a lot of competitions for libraries. He's the go-to person for libraries. As here at Hammersmith, another exercise in sort of a mixture of sort of Queen Anne and a sort of classicism. Very, very interesting buildings, and very, very nice buildings, and very, very nice libraries to be in. He knew how to make libraries function. And if you're down at Golders Green Crematorium, do pay him a visit. There is his memorial plaque. But I think Scarborough deserves to celebrate Henry Hare much better than it does, even though he doesn't do many buildings in Scarborough. And I think I'll leave it there. There's a couple more, but I think I'll leave it there on a high note. The President of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Thank you very much.